If you are watching this alone, especially after midnight, I need you to do one thing. Look at the nearest door in your house and imagine someone quietly standing behind it, listening. Because every story you are about to hear happened to someone who thought they were safely home, completely alone. They were wrong. The first story comes from a college student named Ria, who had just moved into a small rented flat on the edge of the city. Her roommates had gone home for the holidays, and for the first time she had the place entirely to herself. No nagging about lights being left on, no one stealing her snacks, just silence and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. That night she stayed up late revising for an exam. Sitting on the bed with her back against the wall, her notes spread out like a paper fort around her. Around 2 in the morning, when the building was at its quietest, she heard the sound of the main door latch gently clicking. Not the big metallic clank of someone walking in confidently, but the soft, careful sound of metal touching metal, as if someone was trying not to be heard. Ria froze, a pen still in her hand, heart suddenly beating so loudly she was sure whoever was at the door could hear it. She lived on the 3rd floor, and there was no balcony or back entrance, just that single door opening into a narrow corridor. At first she told herself it was nothing, maybe a neighbor checking their lock, maybe the wind, maybe anything except what her stomach was telling her. Then she saw the shadow. The gap beneath the door lit up faintly from the yellow light in the corridor, and there, perfectly still, she saw the dark outline of feet, standing sideways, as if someone had pressed themselves flat against the wall beside the door. Whoever it was, they were not ringing the bell, not knocking, not even moving. They were simply waiting inches from the door, listening to the silence inside. Ria reached for her phone with trembling fingers and opened her landlord's number. But before she could press call, the light under the door suddenly went dark. The corridor light had been turned off from the switch outside. Now she could not even see the feet, only the thin line of the door frame glowing from the streetlight 3 floors below. The silence stretched on, long enough that part of her mind began to wonder if she had imagined it, if stress and caffeine were making her see things. Then her phone screen lit up with a notification, and in that faint blue glow she saw something that almost made her scream. The bottom of the door, where there had been only darkness, now showed a tiny glimmer, a pinprick of red, like the burning dud of a cigarette hanging just above the floor. Whoever was outside was sitting with their back against her door, smoking in the dark, inches from where she sat on the other side. She did not move for almost an hour. She kept her breathing shallow, her eyes fixed on that tiny red light as it brightened and faded, until at last it glowed one final time and vanished. The corridor light came on again with a soft click, and she watched the shadow of the feet slowly pull away from the door and walk down the hallway, unhurried, as if they knew exactly how scared she was and enjoyed every second of it. The next morning the landlord checked the security camera in the corridor, but that part of the footage was nothing but static, as if the feed had been cut just for that hour. Whoever had come to her door left no face, no image, only the memory of smoke drifting under the wood and the knowledge that they had been close enough to hear every breath. Our second story belongs to Arjun, who lived in a quiet, respectable neighborhood where nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. His parents were out of town for a wedding, and he had insisted on staying behind to study for his board exams, proud to finally be trusted with the whole house. It was one of those still, heavy nights when the air feels thick, when the ceiling fan seems to push warm air around instead of cooling it. Arjun had left the living room light on and the television playing softly, just to break the emptiness, while he worked at the dining table with his notes spread out. Sometime after 1, he went to the kitchen to refill his glass of water, and on the way back he passed the big glass sliding door that opened onto the balcony. The curtains were half drawn, moving just a little in the sluggish air, and as he crossed in front of them something caught his eye. There, in the faint reflection of the living room light on the glass, he saw another face looking back at him from the darkness outside. It was pale and slightly blurred by the glass, but the eyes were clear, wide, and completely unblinking. For a second, he thought he was looking at his own reflection distorted by the night, until the face tilted, just a fraction, in the opposite direction from his own movement. The call rang once, twice. Before the third ring, something else rang first. A sharp, metallic rattle from the balcony door handle behind the curtain. It was not loud, not like someone trying to break in. It was worse, a quiet, testing sound, the way you might gently try a doorknob in a house you already felt you owned. Arjun's legs almost gave out. He dropped to a crouch behind the dining table, clutching the phone to his ear with both hands as the line finally connected. Arjun? It's so late. What happened? His neighbor's sleepy voice asked. Uncle, someone is on my balcony, Arjun whispered, forcing his voice not to crack. Please, please don't cut the call. Just come down. Right now. There was a pause on the line, then the soft thud of feet getting out of bed. Stay inside. Don't open anything. I'm coming. The rattling stopped. The silence that replaced it was somehow worse. Arjun could hear his own pulse drumming in his ears, could hear the faint canned laughter from the TV, and underneath that, or maybe only in his imagination, the slow drag of something soft moving against glass. He crawled to the hallway, went into his bedroom, and locked that door too, every click of the bolt sounding far too loud. A minute later, his phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a call. It was a WhatsApp notification from an unknown number. His thumb hovered over it, his brain begging him not to look and yet forcing his eyes to the screen. The message contained only one thing, a photograph. It was his own living room, taken from outside the glass balcony door. In the picture, Arjun stood frozen in front of the glass, his hand just inches from the handle, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The curtains were parted just enough to frame him. The caption below the image read, "Open?" The balcony door was locked, he knew that, but his hand still reached automatically for the handle, as if some part of him wanted to prove it was secure, wanted something solid to hold on to. The instant his fingers touched the metal, the face on the other side broke into a slow, deliberate smile, far too wide, like someone stretching a mask. The glass between them seemed suddenly much thinner, and he remembered, with a cold shock, that the spare key for the balcony door was still hidden under the flower pot outside. Outside, waiting. Arjun snatched his hand back from the handle as if it had burned him. The face on the other side did not flinch. It simply watched him, the too wide smile still stretched across features that looked oddly smudged by the darkness. For a moment he thought of yelling, of trying to scare whoever it was away, but something in the stillness of that expression stopped him. Predators, he remembered from some nature documentary, don't always chase. Sometimes they wait. He stepped backward, slowly, not wanting to turn his back to the glass. With one hand, he reached for his phone on the dining table, never taking his eyes off the reflection. The moment his fingers closed around it, the living room tube light above him flickered once, twice, and went out with a tired pop, plunging the room into a dim gray lit only by the TV in the corner. In that weaker light, the reflection disappeared, swallowed by the darkness outside. He could no longer see the face. He could no longer see if anyone was still there. He didn't dare go closer to check. He moved blindly along the wall until his hand found the switchboard and turned on the small yellow night lamp in the corner instead. It barely lit half the room, but it was enough to see the outline of the curtain, now perfectly still over the glass. Arjun dialed his older neighbor from the floor above, the uncle who always said, "Anything happens, Beta, you call me first." The balcony door was locked, he knew that, but his hand still reached automatically for the handle, as if some part of him wanted to prove it was secure, wanted something solid to hold on to. The instant his fingers touched the metal, the face on the other side broke into a slow, deliberate smile, far too wide, like someone stretching a mask. The glass between them seemed suddenly much thinner, and he remembered, with a cold shock, that the spare key for the balcony door was still hidden under the flower pot outside. Outside, waiting. Arjun snatched his hand back from the handle as if it had burned him. The face on the other side did not flinch. It simply watched him, the too wide smile still stretched across features that looked oddly smudged by the darkness. For a moment he thought of yelling, of trying to scare whoever it was away, but something in the stillness of that expression stopped him. Predators, he remembered from some nature documentary, don't always chase. Sometimes they wait. He stepped backward, slowly, not wanting to turn his back to the glass. With one hand, he reached for his phone on the dining table, never taking his eyes off the reflection. The moment his fingers closed around it, the living room tube light above him flickered once, twice, and went out with a tired pop, plunging the room into a dim gray lit only by the TV in the corner. In that weaker light, the reflection disappeared, swallowed by the darkness outside. He could no longer see the face. He could no longer see if anyone was still there. He didn't dare go closer to check. He moved blindly along the wall until his hand found the switchboard and turned on the small yellow night lamp in the corner instead. It barely lit half the room, but it was enough to see the outline of the curtain, now perfectly still over the glass. Arjun dialed his older neighbor from the floor above, the uncle who always said, "Anything happens, Beta, you call me first." By the time his neighbor and two security guards reached the flat, pounding on the front door and shouting his name, Arjun was on the floor of his bedroom, shaking so hard he could barely unlock it. They swept through the house together. The main door was still bolted from the inside. The balcony curtains billowed gently, as if someone had brushed past them not long ago. When they stepped outside, the spare key that had always been hidden under the flower pot was gone. In its place was a half-smoked cigarette still faintly warm and a small muddy footprint on the railing facing the adjoining building. The society cameras showed nothing but a glitchy blur on Arjun's floor for a 15-minute window around the time of the incident. No one ever identified who had been outside that glass, or how many times they might have stood there on other nights, watching him through the curtains without ever being seen. If the idea of someone waiting outside your home while you think you're safely alone makes your skin crawl, imagine realizing they might already be inside, in the same room as your sleeping child. That's exactly what happened to Mira in our third story. Mira was a young mother living in a two-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a newly built complex. Her husband worked alternating night shifts at a hospital, and after a few months she had grown used to being alone with their 2-year-old son, Arav, for long stretches of the night. To calm her nerves, she had installed a cheap baby monitor, just a small camera mounted in the corner of Arav's room, feeding video straight to an app on her phone. One humid Thursday, her husband messaged that he'd be on duty till morning. Mira put Arav to bed at around 10, tucked his favorite stuffed elephant beside him, and turned on the soft star-shaped night light that projected little constellations on the ceiling. She checked the baby monitor. Clear image, the gentle rise and fall of Arav's blanket as he slept. Satisfied, she closed the door almost all the way, leaving it slightly ajar, and went to the living room to catch up on a show with the volume low. It was a little past 1:30 when her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down, expecting a WhatsApp message, but it was a notification from the baby monitor app, motion detected. Her first thought was that Arav had simply rolled over in his sleep. Still, something in her chest tightened as she tapped the notification and opened the live feed. At first, the image looked normal. Grainy night vision view of the small room, crib in the center, the glow of the star light scattering faint patterns on the walls. Then she saw it. In the bottom left corner of the frame, where the door was, there was a shape that hadn't been there before. It was faint, more like a darker patch against the dark, but as she watched, it seemed to lean forward slightly, as if bending over the crib. She couldn't make out a face, only the impression of long hair falling over where a face should have been. Maybe it's a glitch, she muttered to herself, but her body was already on its feet before her brain finished the sentence. She hurried down the short hallway, her bare feet silent on the floor, heart crashing against her ribs. The door to Arav's room was still slightly open, just as she'd left it. No whispers, no footsteps, just the soft buzz of the ceiling fan. She pushed the door open with her fingertips. The room was empty except for her sleeping son. He lay on his back, one hand flung over his head, mouth slightly open in that deep, dreamless toddler sleep. The nightlight cast tiny stars across his cheeks. Mira checked the wardrobe, behind the curtain, even under the crib, feeling foolish the whole time. No one. Only when she moved to close the window did she notice it was open a few centimeters wider than she remembered, the curtain stirring with the breath of outside air. She shut it firmly, slid the latch into place, and told herself she was overreacting. "You need rest," she whispered, brushing a kiss over Arav's forehead. Back in the living room, she almost didn't open the app again. But anxiety has a way of making you look twice. She checked the feed. Empty room, sleeping child. She switched back to her show. 20 minutes later, the app buzzed again. Motion detected. Her thumb hovered over the notification, a sick déjà vu twisting her stomach. She opened the live feed, and this time the room did not look empty at first glance. The camera, slightly tilted now, framed not only the crib but also part of the doorway and the wall beside it. Something darker than the shadows stood there, a narrow vertical shape that seemed almost human but too still, too straight. As she watched, the shape leaned forward, bending over the crib in a movement so slow it made her skin crawl. Arif did not stir, but the night vision made his open mouth look black and empty, as if something were already inside. Mira whispered her son's name without realizing it, the sound lost in the silent apartment as her own reflection flickered on the phone screen. The shape in the doorway began to turn, as if reacting to that tiny breath of sound, and though the resolution was poor, she felt, rather than saw, that it was now facing the camera. Something in her brain screamed not to look behind her, but her body ignored it, already spinning toward the hallway, already running. The space outside Arif's room was dark, but she could see that the door, which she was sure she'd left slightly ajar, now stood wide open like a black mouth. Her hand slapped the light switch and the bulb flared on, revealing nothing more frightening than peeling paint and an old shoe rack. But when she rushed into the bedroom, the sight of the window made her legs nearly buckle. The latch she had slid firmly into place earlier now hung crooked, and the window stood open a full 30 centimeters, the curtain lifting like a slow, taunting hand. She grabbed Arif into her arms, his warm, sleepy weight the only real thing in that spinning moment, and backed out of the room without taking her eyes off that open gap. Down the corridor, every shadow felt occupied, every corner too narrow, yet she forced herself to walk, not run, to the main door and throw back the bolts. Only when she was in the bright, humming light of the neighbor's living room, Arif clinging to her neck, did she dare to look at her phone again. The app had saved the last motion clip automatically. Together they watched the grainy video, the empty doorway, the slow appearance of a tall, thin figure from the edge of the frame, its head bowed as if listening, its hands hanging too low at its sides. It stepped right up to the crib, so close that its blurred outline seemed to swallow Arif's tiny body, and then, after a long, motionless pause, it turned its head toward the camera as if finally noticing it. The clip ended there, freezing forever on that half-turned, featureless face, and in the reflection on the neighbor's television Mira could see herself, suddenly understanding she would never again sleep in that apartment alone. Ever.